Book 3. Such, then, I said, are our principles of theology. Some tales are to be told, and others not to be told, to our disciples from their youth upwards. If we mean them to honor the gods and their parents, and to value friendship with one another. Yes, and I think that our principles are right, he said. But if they are to be courageous, must they not learn other lessons besides these? And lessons of such kind as to take away their fear of death? Can any man be courageous who has a fear of death in him? Certainly not, he said. And can he be fearless of death, or will he choose death in battle, rather than defeat in slavery, who believes the world below to be real and terrible? Impossible. Then we must assume a control over the narrator of this class of tales, as well as over others, and beg them not to simply to revel, but rather to command the world below, intimidating to them that their descriptions are untrue, and will do harm to our future warriors. That shall be our duty, he said. Then, I said, we shall have to obliterate many obnoxious passages, beginning with the verses. I would rather be a serf on a land of the poor and portionless man than rule over all the dead who have come to naught. We must also expunge the verses which tell us how Plato feared, lest the mansions grim and squalid, with the gods abhor, should be seen both of mortals and the immortals. And again, O heavens, verily in the house of Hades there is a soul in ghostly form, but no mind at all. Again of Tiresias. To him, even after death did Persephone grant mind, that he alone should be wise, but other souls are flitting shades. Again, the soul flying from the limbs had gone to Hades, lamenting her fate, leaving manhood and youth. Again, and the soul, with shrilling cry, paused like smoke beneath the earth. And, as bats in hollow of mystic cavern, whenever any of them have dropped out of the string and fallen from the rock, fly shrilling and cling to another, so that they did with a shrilling cry hold together as they moved. And we must beg Homer and other poets not to be angry if we strike out these and similar passages, not because they're unpoetical or unattractive to the popular ear, but because the greater the poetical charm of them, the less they are meet to the ears of boys and men who are meant to be free, who should be fear slavery more than death. Undoubtedly. Also, we shall have to reject all terrible and appalling names which describe the world below. Cactus and sticks, ghosts under the earth, and sapless shades, and any similar words which the very mention causes a shudder to pass through the inmost soul of him who hears them. I do not say these horrible stories may not have a use of some kind, but there's a danger that the nerves of our guardians may be rendered too excitable and effeminated by them. That's the real danger, he said. Then we must have no more of them. True. Another and nobler strain must be composed and sung by us, clearly. And we shall proceed to get rid of the weepings and wailings of famous men. They will go with the rest. But shall we be right in getting rid of them? Reflect. Our principle is that good men will not consider death terrible to any other good man who is his comrade. Yes, that is our principle. And therefore he will not sorrow for his departed friend as though he had suffered anything terrible. He will not. Such anyone, as we further maintain, is sufficient for himself and his own happiness, and therefore is at least in need of some other men. True, he said, and for this reason the loss of a son of a brother, or the deprivation of fortune, is to him all men least terrible, assuredly. And therefore he will be less likely to lament, and will bear the greatest equanimity any misfortune of the sort that may befall him. Yes, you will feel such a misfortune far less than another. Then we shall be right in getting rid of the lamentations of famous men, and making them over to women, and not even to women who are good for anything, or to men of a baser sort, than those who are being educated by us, by the defenders of the country, may scorn to do the like. That will be very right. Then we will, once more, entreat Homer and the other poets not to depict Achilles, who is the son of the goddess, lying on his side, then on his back, and then on his face, and starting up and sailing in a frenzy along the shores of a barren sea, now taking the sooty ashes in both of his hands, and pouring them over his head, or weeping and wailing in various modes which Homer has delineated. Nor should he describe Priam and the kinsmen of the gods as praying and beseeching, rolling in the dirt, calling each man loudly by his name. Still more earnestly will we beg of him, at all events, not to introduce the gods lamenting and saying, Alas, my misery! Alas, that is I bore the bravest to my sorrow. But if he must introduce the gods, at any rate, let him not dare so completely to misrepresent the greatest of the gods, as to make him say, O heavens, with my eyes verily I behold a dear friend of mine chased round and round the city, and my heart is sorrowful. Or again, woe is me that I am fated to have Seraphon, dearest to men to me, subdued at the hands of Patroclus, the son of Menelaus. For if, my sweet Enymantus, our youth seriously listen to such unworthy representation of the gods, instead of laughing at them as they ought, hardly with any of them deem that he himself, being but a man, can be dishonored by similar actions, neither will he rebute any inclination which have arise in his mind to say to do the like. And instead of having any shame or self-control, he will always be whining and lamenting on the slightest occasions. Yes, he said, that is most true. Yes, I replied, but that surely is what not ought to be. As the argument has just proved to us, and the proof that we must abide until it is disproved by a better, it ought not to be. Neither ought our guardians to be given to laughter, for a fit of laughter which has been indulged to excess almost always produces a violent reaction. So I believe. Then persons of wealth, even if mortal men, must not be represented by overcome by laughter, and still less must be representation of the gods to be allowed. Still less of gods, as you say, he replied. Then we shall not suffer such an expression to be used about the gods as that of Homer when he describes how inextinguishable laughter arose among the blessed gods when they saw Hephaestus bustling about the mansion. On your views, we must not admit them. On my views, if you like to father them on me, that we must not admit that it is certain. Again, truth should be highly valued. If, as we were saying, a lie is useless to the gods, and useful only as a medicine to men, then the use of such a medicine should be restricted to physicians, private individuals who have no business with it. Clearly not, he said. Then if anyone at Isolde have the privilege of lying, the rulers of the state should be the persons, and they, in their dealing either with the enemies or with their own citizens, may be allowed to lie for the public good, but nobody else should be meddled with anything of the kind. And although the rulers have this privilege, for a private man to lie to them in return is to be deemed a more heinous fault than for a patient or a pupil of the gymnasium not to speak the truth about his own bodily illnesses to the physician or to the trainer, or for a sailor not to tell the captain what is happening about the ship and to the rest of the crew, and how things are going with himself or his fellow sailor. Most true, he said. If, then, the rulers catches anyone besides himself lying to the state, any of the craftsmen, whether he be priest or physician or carpenter, he will be punished for introducing a practice which is equally subversive and destructive of the ship or state. Most certainly, he said, if our idea of the state is ever carried out. In the next place, our youth must be temperate. Certainly. Are not the chief elements of temperance, speaking generally, obedience to commanders and self-control and sensual pleasures? True. Then we shall approve such language as of that of Diomed and Homer. Friend, sit still and obey my word. And the verses which follow. The Greeks march breathing prolix, in silent awe of their leaders, and other sentiments of the same kind. We shall. What of this line? O heavy with wine, who hast the eyes of a dog and the heart of a stag. And with the words which follow. Would you say that these, or any similar impertinences, which private individuals are supposed to address to their rulers, whether in verse or prose, are well or ill spoken? They are ill spoken. They may very possibly afford some amusement, but they do not conduct to temperance, and therefore would be likely to do harm to our young men. You would agree with me there? Yes. And then again, to make the wisest of men say that nothing in his opinion is more glorious than, when the tables are full of bread and meat, and the cupbearer carries around wine, which he draws from the bowl and pours into the cups. Is it fit or conducive to temperance for young men to hear such words? Or the verse, the saddest of fates is to die and meet destiny from hunger. What would you say then to the tale of Zeus, who, while other gods and men were asleep, and he was the only person awake, lay devising plans, but forgot all of them in a moment through his lust, and was so completely overcome at the sight of Hera, that he would not even go into the hunt, but wanted to lie with her on the ground, declaring that he had never been in such a state of rapture before, even before they first met another, without knowledge of their parents? Or that other tale of how Hephaestus, because of similar goings-on, cast a chain around Ares and Aphrodite. Indeed, he said, I'm strongly of the opinion that they ought not to hear such a thing. But any deeds of endurance which are done or told by famous men, they have ought to see and hear, as for example, where it is said in the verses. He smote his breast, and thus reproached his heart. Endure, my heart, far worse hast thou endured. Certainly, he said. In the next place, we must not let them be receivers of gifts or lovers of money. Certainly not. Neither must we sing to them of gifts persuading gods and persuading revered kin. Neither is Phoenix, the tutor of Achilles, to be approved or deemed of getting his pupil good counsel when he told him that he should take the gifts of the Greeks and assist them, but that without a gift he should not lay aside his anger. Neither will we believe or acknowledge Achilles himself to be such a lover of money that he took Agamemnon's gifts, or that when he had received payment he restored the dead body of Hector, but that without payment he was unwilling to do so. Undoubtedly, he said, those are not sentiments which can be approved. Loving Homer as I do, I hardly like to say that in attributing these feelings to Achilles, or believing that they are truly attributed to him, he is guilty of downright impiety. As little can I believe the narrative of insolence to Apollo, where he says, Thou hast wronged me, O far darter, most abnormal of deities. Verily I would even with thee, if I had only the power. Or his insubordinance to the river god, on whose divinity he is ready to lay hands, or his offering to the dead Patroclus of his own hair, which has been previously dedicated to the other river god Supercades, and that actually performed this vow, or that he dragged Hector round the tomb of Patroclus, and slaughtered the captors at the pyre. All of these I cannot believe he was guilty, any more than I can allow our citizens to believe that he, the wise Charion's pupil, the son of a goddess and of Peleus, who is the gentlest of men, and third in descent from Zeus, was so disordered in his wits as to be one slave of two seemingly inconsistent passions, meanness and not attained by avarice, combined with overweening contempt of God and men. You're quite right, he replied, and let us equally refuse to believe, or allow to be repeated, the tale of Theseus son of Poseidon, or of Pithrius son of Zeus, who went forth as they did to perpetuate a horrid rape, or of any other hero or son of God daring to do such impious and dreadful things as they falsely ascribe to them in our day. And let us further compel the poets to declare either that these acts were not done by them, or that they were not done by sons of God, both in the same breath that they now be preferred to affirm. We will not have them trying to persuade our youth that the gods are the authors of evil, and that the heroes are no better than men, sentiments which, as we were saying, are neither pious nor true, for we have already proved that evil cannot come from the gods. Assuredly not. And further, they are likely to have a bad effect on those who hear them, for anybody who begins to excuse his own vices when he is convinced that similar wickedness has always been perpetuated by the kindred of gods, the relatives of Zeus, whose ancestral altar, the altar of Zeus, is aloft in the air on the peak of Ida, and who, the blood of deities yet flowing in their veins, and therefore let us put an end to such tales, lest they endanger laxity of morals among the youth. By all means, he replied, but now we are just determining what classes of subjects are or not to be spoken of. Let us see whether they've been omitted by us. The manner in which gods and demigods and heroes of the world below should be treated has already been laid down. Very true. And what shall we say about men? That is clearly a remaining portion on our subject. Clearly so. But we are not in a condition to answer this question at present, my friend. Why not? Because, if I am not mistaken, we shall have to say about men, poets, and storytellers are guilty of making the gravest misstatements when they tell us that wicked men are often happy, and that good miserable, and that injustice is profitable when undetected, but that the justice is a man's own loss and another's gain. These things shall be forbid them to utter, and command them to sing and say the opposite. To be sure we shall, he said. But if you admit that I am right in this, then I shall maintain that you've implied the principle for what we have been all along contending. I grant you the truth of your inference. That such things are or not to be said about men is a question which we cannot determine until we have discovered what justice is, now naturally advantageous to the possessor, whether he seems to be just or not. Most true, he said. Enough of the subjects of poetry. Let us speak of the style, and when this has been considered, both matter and manner will be completely treated. I do not understand what you mean, said Idomeneus. Then I must make you understand, and perhaps it might be more intelligible if I put this matter this way. You are aware, I suppose, that all mythology and poetry is a narration of events, either past, present, or to come. Certainly, he replied. And narration may be either simple narration or imitation or a union of the two. That again, he said, I do not quite understand. I fear that I must be a ridiculous teacher when I have so much difficulty in making myself apprehended. Like a bad speaker, therefore, I will not take the whole of the subject, but it will break pieces off in illustration of my meaning. You know that the first lines of the Iliad, in which the poet says that Chryseis prayed Agamemnon to release his daughter, and that Agamemnon flew to the possession. Agamemnon to release his daughter, and that Agamemnon flew into a passion with him, whereupon Chryseis, failing of his object, invoked the anger of the god against Achaeans. Now, as far as these lines, as he prayed to all the Greeks, but especially to the two sons of Atreus, the chief of the people. The poet is speaking in his own person. He never leads us to suppose that he is anyone else, but is what is follows, he takes the person of Chiros, and then he does all that he can to make us believe that the speaker is not Homer, but the aged priest himself. And in this double form, he casts the entire narrative of the events which occur at Troy and in Ithaca and throughout the Odyssey. Yes, and a narrative that it remains both in the speeches which the poet recites from time to time into the intermediate passages. Quite true. But when the poet speaks in the person of another, may we not say that he assimilates his style to that of the person who, as he informs you, is going to speak? Certainly. And this assimilation of himself to another, either by the use of voice or gesture, is an imitation of the person whose character he assumes. Of course. Then it is this case, the narration of the poet may be said to proceed by way of imitation. Very true. Or, if the poet everywhere appears and never conceals himself, then again the imitation is dropped, and his poetry becomes simple narration. However, in order that I may make my meaning quite clear, and that you may no more say, I don't understand, I will show you how the change might be effected. If Homer had said, the priest came, having his daughter ransom in his hands, supplicating the Achaeans, and above all the kings, and then if, instead of speaking the persons of Chryseis, he continued in his own person, the words would have been, not imitation, but simple narration. The passage would have run as follows. I am no poet, and therefore I drop. The priest came, and prayed the gods on behalf of the Greeks that they might capture Troy and return safely home, but begged that they would give back his daughter, and take ransom which he had brought, and respect the god. Thus he spoke, and the other Greeks revered the priest in assent. But Agamemnon was wroth, and bade him depart and not come again, lest the staff and chaplets of the god shall no avail to him. The daughter of Cyrus should not be released, he said. She should grow old with him in Argo. And then he told him to go away and not to provoke him. He intended to get home unscathed. And the old man went away in fear and silence. And when he had left the camp, he called upon Apollo by his many names, reminding him of everything which he had done to please to him, whether in building his temples, or in offering sacrifice, and praying to his good deeds might be returned to him, and that the Achaeans may expiate his tears by arrows of the gods, and so on. In this way the whole narrative becomes simple. I understand, he said. Or you may suppose the opposite case, that only intermediate passages are omitted, and dialogue is only left. That also, he said, I understand. You mean, for example, as in a tragedy. You have not conceived my meaning perfectly, and if I mistake not, what you failed to apprehend before is now made clear to you. That poetry and mythology are, in some cases, wholly imitative. Instances of this are supplied by tragedy and comedy. There is likewise the opposite style, in which the poet is the only speaker of this dithyramb affords the best example. And the combination of both is found in the epic, and several other styles of poetry. Do I take you with me? Yes, he said. I see now what you meant. I will now ask you to remember also what I had began by saying, that we had done in the subject and might proceed to the style. Yes, I remember. In saying that, I intended to imply that we must come to an understanding about the mimetic art, whether the poets in narrating their stories are to be allowed by us to imitate, and if so, whether the whole or in part, and if in the latter, in which parts, or should all imitation be prohibited? You mean, I suspect, to ask whether tragedy and comedy shall be omitted in our state. Yes, I said, but there may be more than this in this question. I really do not know as of yet, but whether the argument may below, thither we go. And go we will, he said. Then, Adeimantus, let me ask you whether our guardians ought to be imitators, or rather, he has not this question be decided by rule already laid down by one man that can do one thing well, and not many. And then if he attempts many, he will altogether fail of gaining much reputation in any. Certainly. And this is equally true of imitation. No one man can imitate many things as well as he would imitate a single one. He cannot. Then the same person would hardly be able to play a serious part in life, and at the same time be an imitator, and imitate many other parts as well. For even when two species of imitation are nearly allied, the same persons cannot succeed in both. As, for example, the writers of the
tragedy and comedy. Did you not just call them imitation? Yes, I did. And you're right in thinking that the same persons cannot succeed in both, and any more than can be the rhapsodists and actors at once. True. Neither are comic and tragic actors the same, yet all these things are but imitation. They are so. And human nature, Adeimantus, appears to have been coined in yet smaller pieces, and to be incapable of imitating many things well, as of performing well the actions of which imitations are copied. Quite true, he replied. If we then adhere to an original notation and bear in mind that our guardians, setting aside every other business, are to delegate themselves wholly to the maintenance of freedom of the state, making this their craft, and engaging in no work which does not bear on this end, they ought to not practice or imitate anything else. If they imitate at all, they should imitate from youth upward only those characteristics which are suitable to their profession, the courage, the temperate, holy, free, and the like. But they should not depict or be skillful in imitating any kind of illiberality or baseness, lest from imitation they should come to be what they imitate. Did you not ever observe how imitations, beginning in early youth and continuing far into life, at length grow into habits and become second nature, affecting body, voice, and mind? Yes, certainly, he said. Then, I said, we will not allow for these whom profess a care, and of whom we say that they ought to be good men, to imitate a woman, and whether young or old, quarreling with her husband, or striving or vaunting against the gods in conceit of her happiness, or when she is in affliction, or sorrow, or weeping, and certainly not one who is in sickness, love, or labor. Very right, he said. Neither must they represent slaves, male or female, performing the office of slave. They must not. And surely not bad men, whether cowards or any other, who do the reverse of what we had just been prescribing, who scold or mock or revel one another in drink and or out of drink, or who in any manner sin against themselves and their neighbors in the word or deed, as a manner of such is. Neither should they be trained to imitate the actions or speech of men or women who are mad or bad. For madness, like vice, it is to be known, but not to be practiced or imitated. Very true, he replied. Neither may they imitate smiths or other artificers, or oarsmen, or boatswains, or the like. How can they, he said, when they are not allowed to apply their minds to the calling of any of these? Nor may they imitate the neighing of horses, the bellowing of bulls, the murmurs of rivers, the roll of the ocean, thunder, and all sorts of things. Nay, he said, if madness be forgiven, neither may they copy the behavior of a madman. You mean, I said, if I understand you all right, that there is a sort of narrative style which may be employed by a truly good man when he has anything to say, and then another sort will be used by men of an opposite character in education. And which of these are two sorts? He asked. Suppose, I answered, that a just and good man in the course of the narration comes in some saying or action of another good man. I should imagine that he will like to personate him. He will not be ashamed of this sort of imitation. He will be most ready to play the part of the good man when he is acting firmly and wisely, in a less degree when he is overtaken by illness or love or drink, or has met with any other disaster. But when he comes to a character which is unworthy of him, he will not make a study of that. He will disdain such a person, and will assume his likeness, if at all, for a moment only when he is performing some good action. At other times, he will be ashamed to play the part when he has never practiced, nor will he like to fashion and frame himself after the baser model. He feels the employment of such an art, unless in jest, to be beneath him, and the mind revolts at it. So I should expect, he replied. Then he will adopt a mode of narration such as we have illustrated out of Homer. That is to say, his style will be imitative and narrative, but there will be very little of the former, and a great deal of the latter. Do you agree? Certainly, he said. That is the model which seems the speaker must necessarily take. But there is another sort of character who will be narrating anything. The worse he is, the more unscrupulous he will be. Nothing will be too bad for him, and he'll be ready to imitate anything. Not as a joke, but in the right good earnest, and before a large company. As I was just saying now, he will attempt to represent the roll of thunder, the noise of wind and hail, or creaking of the wheels, the pulleys, and the various sounds of flutes, pipes, trumpets, and all sorts of instruments. He will bark like a dog, bleat like a sheep, or crow like a cock. His entire art will be consistent imitation of voices and gestures, and there will be very little narration. That, he said, will be the mode of speaking. These, then, are two kinds of style. Yes, and you would agree with me in saying that one of them is simple, and has but slight changes, if the harmony and rhythm are also shown for their simplicity. The result is that the speaker, if he speaks correctly, is always pretty much the same in style, and he will keep within the limits of a single harmony, for the changes are not great. And in like manner, he will make use of nearly the same rhythm. That is quite true, he said. Whereas the other requires all sorts of harmonies and all sorts of rhythms, if the music and style are to correspond, because the style has all sorts of changes. That is also perfectly true, he replied. And do not the two styles, or the mixture of the two, comprehend all poetry, and every form of expression in words? No one could say anything except in one or another or both together. They include all, he said. And shall we receive in our state all three styles, or one of the two unmixed styles, or would you include the mix? I should prefer only to admit the pure imitator of virtue. Yes, I said, Adeimantus. But the mixed style is also very charming, and indeed a pantomimic, which is the opposite of the one chosen by you, is most popular style with children and their attendants, and with the world in general. I do not deny it. But I would suppose that in such a style unsuitable to our state, in which human nature is not twofold or manifold. For one place, one part only. Yes, quite unsuitable. And this is the reason why in our state, and in our state only, we shall find a shoemaker be a shoemaker, and not a pilot also, and a husbandman to be a husbandman, and not a die-cast also, and a soldier, and not a trader also, and the same throughout. True, he said. And therefore, when one of these pantomatic gentlemen, who are so clever that they can imitate anything, comes to us and makes a proposal to exhibit himself in his poetry, we shall fall down and worship him as a sweet and holy and wonderful being. But we must also inform him that in our state, such as that he are not to be permitted to exist. The law will not allow them. And so we have anointed him with the mire, and set a garland of wool upon his head, and we shall send him away to another city. For we mean to employ our souls' health, the rougher and severer poets or storytellers, who imitate the style of the virtuous only, and then follow these models we prescribed at first when we began the education of our soldiers. We certainly will, he said, if we have the power. Then now, my friend, I said, that part of music or literary education which relates to story and myth may be considered to be finished, and the matter of both have been discussed. I think so too, he said. Next in order will follow melody and song. That is obvious. Everyone can see already what we have to say about them if we are to be consistent with ourselves. I fear, said Glosson, laughing, that the word everyone hardly includes me, for I cannot in a moment say what there should be, though I may guess. At any rate, you can tell that a song or ode has three parts: the words, the melody, and the rhythm. That degree of knowledge I may be presumed. Yes, he said, so as much as you that may you say. As for the words, surely be no difference between the words in which are, and which are not, are set to the music. Both are conformed to the same laws, and they have already been determined by us. Yes, the melody and the rhythm will depend upon the words, certainly. We were saying, when we spoke of the subject matter, that we had no real need of lamentations and strains of sorrow. True. When we are harmonious expressions of sorrow, you are musical, and you can tell me. Harmonies what you mean by a mixed or the tenor Lydian, or the full tone or bass Lydian, and such like. Then these, I said, must be banished, even to women who have the character to maintain they are of no use, and are much less to men. Certainly, in place drunkenness and softness and indolence are utterly unbecoming of the character of our guardian. Utterly unbecoming. And in which soft or drinking harmonies? The Ionian, he replied, and the Lydian. They are the termed relaxed. Well, are these of military use? Quite the reverse, he replied, and if so, the Dorian and Phrygians, the only ones will have the less. I answered, of the harmonies I know nothing, but I want to have one warlike, to sound the note or accent which a brave man utters in the hour of danger and stern resolve, or when his cause is failing, and he is going to wounds or death, or is overtaken by some sort of evil, and at every such crisis meets the blows of fortune which firm step and determination to endure, and then another to be used by him in times of peace and freedom of action, when there is no pressure of necessity, and he is seeking to persuade God by prayer, or man by instruction or admonition. Or, on the other hand, when he is expressing his willingness to yield in the persuasion of or entreaty or admonition, and when he represents him by the prudent conduct he has attained at this end, not carried away by his success, but acting moderately and wisely under the circumstances, and acquiescing in the event. These two harmonies I ask you to leave: the strain of necessity and strain of freedom, the strain of the unfortunate and strain of the fortunate, the strain of courage, strain of temperance. These, I say, leave. And these, he replied, are the Dorian and Phrygian harmonies in which I am now speaking. Then, I said, if these and only these are to be used in our songs and melodies, we should not want multiplicity of notes or harmonic scales. I suppose not. Then we shall not maintain the artifices of lyres, with the three corners and complex scales, or the making of any many-string continuously harmonized instrument. Certainly not. But what do you say to flute makers and flute players? What do you admit them in their state when you reflect that the composite uses harmony of the flute is worse than all the stringed instruments put together? Even the panharmonic music is only an imitation of the flute. Certainly not. There remains the only lyre and the harp for the use in the city, and the shepherds may have the pipe in the country. That is surely the conclusion they're drawn from the argument. The preferring of Apollo and his instruments to the Mire says, and his instruments is not all that strange, I said. Not at all, he replied. And so, by the dog of Egypt, we have been unconsciously purging the state, which not long ago we termed luxurious. And we have done wisely, he replied. Then let us now finish the purgation, I said. Next in the order of harmonies, rhythms will naturally flow, and they should be subject to the same rules, for we ought not to seek the complex systems of the meter, or the meters of every kind, but rather to discover what rhythms are the expressions of the courageous and the harmonious life. And when we have found them, we shall adopt the foot and the melody to the words, have like spirit, not the words to the foot and the melody. To say that these rhythms will be your duty, you must teach them to me, as you have already taught me the harmony. But, indeed, he replied, I can't tell you. I only know that there's some three principles of rhythm, out of which metrical systems are framed. Just as sounds, there are four notes out of which the harmony are composed. That is the observation which I have made. But of what sort of lives they are severely the imitations I am unable to say. Then, I said, we must take Damon into our counsel, and they will tell us the rhythms are expression of meaningness or insolence or fury or unworthiness, what to be reversed to the expressions of opposite feelings. And then I think we have an indistinct recollection of the mentioning of a complex cretic rhythm, also a dectalic or hero, and he arranged them in some manner which I do not quite understand, making the rhythms equal in the rise and fall of the foot, long and short alternating, and unless I am mistaken, he spoke of an iambic as well as a trochean rhythm, and assigned them to short and long quantities. Also in the case he appeared to praise or censure the movement of the foot quite as much as the rhythm, or perhaps a combination of the two, for I am not certain what he meant. These matters, however, as I was saying, had better be referred to Damon himself, for the analysis of the subject would be difficult, Rather so, I should say. But there is no difficulty in seeing that grace or the absence of grace is an effect of good or bad rhythm. Not at all. And that good and bad rhythm naturally assimilate to be a good and bad style. The harmony and discord in like manner follow style. For our principle is that rhythm and harmony are regulated by words and not the words by them. Just so, he said, they should follow the word. And will not the words of the character of the style depend on the temper of the soul? Yes. And everything else on the style? Yes. Then beauty of style and harmony and grace and good rhythm depends on simplicity. I mean, the true simplicity of a rightly and nobly ordered mind in the character, not of the other simplicity, which is only an euphemism for full. Very true, he replied. And our youth are to do work in their life. Must they not make graces and harmonies in their perpetual aim? They must. And surely the art of the painter and every other creative and constructive art are full of them. Weaving, embroidery, architecture, and any kind of manufacturing. Also nature, animals and vegetable. In all of them there is grace or absence of grace, and ugliness and discord and inharmonious motion are nearly allied in ill words and ill nature, as grace and harmony are the twin sisters of goodness and virtue and to bear their likeness. That's quite true, he said. But shall our superintendents go no further, and the poets only to be required by us to express the image of the good in their works, or on pain, if they do anything else, of expulsion from our state? Or is the same control to be extended to other artists, and they are to be prohibited from exhibiting the opposite forms of vice and intemperance and meaninglessness and indecency in sculpture and building and the other creative art, and that he who cannot conform to the rules of ours shall be prevented from practicing his art in our state, lest the taste of our citizens be corrupted by him. Why, we would not only have our guardians grow up amid images of moral deformity as some noxious pasture, and their brows and feed upon many of a baneful herb, and flower day by day, little by little, until they silently gather a festering mass of corruption in their own soul. Let our artists rather be those who are gifted to discern the true nature of the beautiful and graceful. Then we will our youth dwell in the land of health, amidst fair sight and sound, and receive the good in everything, and beauty and effluence of the fair work shall flow into their ear, and like a health-giving breeze from the pure region, and insensibly drawn from the soul from earliest years into likeness and sympathy with the beauty of reason. There can be no nobler training than that, he replied. And therefore, I said, Glaucon, musical training is the most potent instrument than any other, because rhythm and harmony find their way inward places of the soul, on which they mightily fasten, imparting grace, and making the soul of him who is rightly educated gracefully, or if of himself who is ill-educated ungracefully, and also because he who has received this true education of inner being will most shrewdly perceive omissions or faults in art and nature, and with true taste, while he praises and rejoices over and receives into good into his soul, it becomes noble and good. He will justly blame and hate the bad, now in the days of his youth, even before he is able to know the reason why. And when reasons come, he will recognize and salute the friend with whom his education has made him long familiar. Yes, he said, I quite agree with you thinking that. Our youth should be trained in music on the grounds of which you mentioned. Just as in learning to read, I said, we are satisfied when we know the letters of the alphabet, which are very few, in all their recurring sizes and combinations, not slighting them as unimportant whether they occupy a space large or small, but everywhere eager to make them out, and not thinking ourselves perfect in art of reading until we recognize them whether they are found true, or as we recognize the reflections of letters in the water, or in a mirror, or when we know the letters themselves, the same art and study giving us the knowledge of both. Exactly. Even so, as I maintain, neither we nor our guardians, with whom we have to educate, can ever become musical until we know that they know the essential forms and all their combinations, and can recognize them in their images wherever they are found, not slighting them either in small things or great, but believing them all within the spheres of our one art and study. Most assuredly. And when the beautiful soul harmonizes with the beautiful form, and the two are cast in one mold, they will be the fairest of sights to him who has the eye to see it. The fairest indeed, and the fairest is also the loveliest, that may be assumed. And the man who has the spirit of harmony will most in love with the loveliest, but he will not love him with the inharmonious soul. That is true, he replied, if the deficiency be in his soul, but if there are any merely bodily defects in another, he will be patient of it, and will love all the same. I perceive, I said, that you have at least, or have had, experience of this sort, and I agree, but let me ask you another question. Has excess of pleasure any affinity to temperance? How can that be? He replied. Pleasure derives from a man of the use of faculties quite as much as pain, or any affinity to virtue in general? None whatever. Any affinity to wantonness and intemperance? Yes, the greatest. And is there any greater or keener pleasure than that of sensual love? No, nor a matter. Whereas true love is the love of beauty and order, temperance and harmony. Quite true, he said. Then no intemperance or madness should be allowed to approach true love. Certainly not. Then mad or intemptuous pleasure must never be allowed to come near the lover and his beloved. Neither of them can have any part of it if their love is of the right sort. No, indeed, Socrates. It must never come near them. Then I suppose that in the city we are founding, you would make a law to an effect that a friend should use no other familiarity to his love than the father would use to his son, and then only for the noble purpose. Then he must first have the other's consent, and then this rule is to limit him in all his intercourse, and he is never to be seen going further, or, if he is to exceed, he has to be deemed guilty of his coarseness and bad taste. I quite agree, he said. Thus much of music, which makes a fair ending, for what be end of music if not love of beauty? I agree, he said. After music comes gymnastic, in which our youth are next to be trained. Certainly. Gymnastic as well as music should begin early years. The training should be careful and should continue throughout life. Now, my belief is, and this is the matter of which I like to have your opinion in confirmation of my own, but my belief is, not that the good body or any bodily excellence improves the soul, but on the contrary, that a good soul, by her own excellence, improvises the body as far as this may be possible. What do you say? Yes, I agree. Then, to the mind in which adequately trained, we shall be right in handling over a more particular case of the body, and in order to avoid proximity, we will now only give the general outlines of the subject. Very good. That we must abstain from intoxication has been already remarked by us, for all the persons a guardian should be the last to get drunk and not know where the world he is. Yes, he said, that a guardian would require another guardian to take care of him in a ridiculous indeed. But next, we shall say of their food, for men are not in training of good courtesy of all. Contest of all, are they not? Yes, he said. And the habit of the body of the ordinary athletes be suited to them. Why not? I am afraid, I said, that the habit of the body, such they have the habit, is but a sleepy sort of thing, and rather perilous to health. Do you not observe that athletes sleep away their lives and are liable to most damaged illnesses if they depart, if ever so slightly a degree, from the customary regimen? Yes, I do. Then, I said, a finer sort of training will be required from our warrior athletes, who are like to be wakeful dogs, and to see and hear the utmost keenness, amid the many changes of water and also food, the summer heat and winter cold, which they must have to endure when on campaign. They must not be liable to break down in health. That is my view. The really excellent gymnastic is twin sister of the simple music which you are now describing. How so? Why, I conceive that there is gymnastic which, like our music, is simple as good, and especially the military gymnastic. What do you mean? My meaning may be learned from Homer. He, you know, feeds his heroes at the feast, and when they are campaigning on soldiers' fare, they have no fish, although they are on the shores of Hellespont, and are not allowed to boil meat, but only roast, which is the food most convenient for soldiers, requiring only that they should light a fire, and not involved in trouble of carrying about pots and pans. True. And I can hardly be mistaken in saying that sweet sauces are nowhere to be mentioned in Homer. In prescribing them, however, he is not singular. All professional athletes are well aware that a man who is to be in good condition should take nothing of the kind.
Yes, he said. And knowing this, they are quite right in not taking them. Then would you not approve of the Syracusan dinner and the refinements of the Sicilian cookery? I think not. Nor, if a man is to be in condition, would you allow him to have a Corinthian girl as his fair friend? Certainly not. Neither would you approve of delicacies, as they are thought, of Athenian confectionery. Certainly not. All such feeding and living might be rightfully compared by us to melody and song composed of the panharmonic style, and in all rhythm. Exactly. Their complexity endangered license, and here deceit. Whereas simplicity in music was a parent of temperance of the soul, and simplicity in the gymnastic of health of the body. Most true, he said. But when intemperance and disease multiply in a state, halls of justice and medicine are always being opened, and in the art of the doctor and the lawyer give themselves air, finding how keen is the interest would not only the slaves but the freemen of the city take about them. Of course. And yet what greater proof can there be of a bad and disgraceful state of education than this? That not only artisans and the meaner sort of people need the skill of first-rate physicians and judges, but also those who would profess to have a liberal education. Is it not disgraceful and a great sign of want of good breeding that a man should have to go abroad for his law and physic because he has nothing of his own at home, and he must therefore surrender himself in the hand of other men who make him his lords and judges over him. Of all things, he said, the most disgraceful. Would you say most, I replied, when you consider that the further stage of evil in which a man is not only a lifelong litigant, passing all his days in the courts, either as a plaintiff or defendant, but actually led by his bad taste to pride himself on his litigious. He imagines that he is a master of dishonesty, able to take every crooked turn, wriggle into and out of every hole, bending like a Scythian getting out of the way of justice. And all for what? And in order to gain small points not worth mentioning, he not knowing that so to order his life as to be able to do without a napping judge is far higher and nobler sort of thing. Is it not still more disgraceful? Yes, he said, that is still more disgraceful. Well, I said, and to require the help of medicine, not when a wound has to be cured or on an occasion of epidemic, but just because, by indolence in the habit of life, such as we've been describing, men fill themselves with waters and winds, as if their bodies were a marsh, compelling the ingenious sons of Aeschylus to find more names for diseases such as flatulence and cholera. Is not this, too, a disgrace? Yes, he said, they certainly do give a very strange and newfangled names to diseases. Yes, I said, and I do not believe that there were any such diseases in the days of Aeschylus. And this I infer from the circumstances that the hero Iphialtes, after had been wounded in Homer, drinks a posset of Flaminian wine, well sprinkled with barley meal and grated cheese, which are certainly inflammatory. And yet the sons of Aeschylus, who were at the Trojan War, do not blame the damsel who gave him the drink, or rebuke Patroclus, who is treating his case. Well, he said, that was surely an extraordinary drink to be given to a person in his condition. Not so extraordinary, I replied, if you bear in mind that in the former days, as is commonly said, before the time of Herodotus, the guild of Aeschylus did not practice our present system of medicine, which may be said to educate diseases, but Herodotus, being a trainer and himself of sickly constitution, by a combination of training and doctoring, found out a way of torturing first and chiefly himself, and secondly the rest of the world. How was that? He said. By the invention of lingering death, for he had an immortal disease which he perpetually tended, and as a recovery was out of the question, he passed his entire life as a valetudinarian. He could do nothing but attend upon himself, and he was in constant torment whenever he departed in anything from his usual regimen. And so, dying hard, by the help of science, he struggled on to an old age. Reward for his skill. Yes, I said, a reward which a man might fairly expect who had never understood that. If Aeschylus did not instruct his descendants to valetudinarian art, the mission arose, not from ignorance or inexperience of such a branch of medicine, but because in all well-ordered states every individual has an occupation to which must be attended, and therefore no leisure to spend in continually being ill. This was remarked case of the artisan, but ludicrously enough, do not apply the same rule to the people of the richer sort. How do you mean? He said. I mean this. When a carpenter is ill, he asks the physician for a rough and ready cure. An emetic or a purge or a cautery or a knife. Those are his remedies. And if someone prescribes for him a course of dietitian and tells him that he must swathe and swaddle his head and all that sort of thing, he replies at once that he has no time to be ill and that he sees no good in life which is spent nursing his disease to neglect of his customary employment, and therefore bidding goodbye to this sort of physician, he resumes his ordinary habits, and either gets well and lives on and does his business, or if his constitution fails, he dies and has no more trouble. Yes, he said, and a man in his condition of life ought to use the art of medicine thus far only. Has he not, I said, an occupation, and what profit would there be in life if he was deprived of all his occupation? Quite true, he said, but with the rich man this is otherwise. Of him we do not say that he has any specially appointed work which he must perform, if he would live. He is generally supposed to have nothing to do. Then you've never heard of the saying of Aeschylus, that as soon as a man has a livelihood that he should practice virtue? Nay, he said, I think that he had better begin somewhat sooner. Let us have some dispute with him about this, I said, but rather ask ourselves, is the practice of virtue obligatory on the rich man, or can he live without it? And if obligatory for him, then let us raise a further question, whether this dieting of disorders, which is impediment to the application of the mind in carpeting and the mechanical art, does not equally stand in the way of the sentiment of Theocles. Of that, he replied, there could be no doubt. Such excessive care of the body, when carried beyond the rules of gymnastics, is most inimical to the practice of virtue. Yes, indeed, I replied, and equally incompatible with the management of the house, an army, or an office of state, and what is most important of all, irreconcilable with any type of study or thought or self-reflection. There is a constant suspicion that headache and giddiness are to be ascribed to philosophy, and hence all practicing and making trial of a virtue in the higher sense is absolutely stopped.
For a man is always fancying that he's being made ill, and is a constant anxiety about the state of his body. Yes, likely enough. And therefore our polite Acephalus may be supposed to exhibit the power of his art only to persons who, being generally of healthy constitution and habit of life, have a definite ailment, such as those he cured by purges and operations, and bade them lives as usual, herein consulting the interest of the state. But bodies which disease have penetrated through and throughout, he would not have attempted to cure by gradual procedure of evacuation and infusion. He did not want to lengthen out good-for-nothing lives, or to have weak fathers begetting weaker sons. If a man was not able to live in an ordinary way, he had no business to cure him, for such a cure would have been no use to either himself, or the state. Then he said, "You regard Acephalus as a statesman." Clearly. And his character is further illustrated by his sons. Not that they were heroes in the day of old and practiced the medicines of which I'm speaking of the siege of Troy. You'll remember now, when Pandurus wounded Menelaus, they sucked the blood out of the wound and sprinkled soothing remedies. But they never prescribed what the patient was afterwards to eat or drink in the case of Menelaus, any more than in the case of Eurypylus. The remedies, as they conceived, were enough to heal any man before he was wounded, was healthy and regular in his habits, and even though they did happen to drink a positive Priminian wine, he might as well get the same. But they would have nothing to do with the unhealthy and intemperate subjects, whose lives were of no use either to themselves or others. The art of medicine was not designed for their good, and although they were rich as Midas, the son of Cephalus would have declined to attend to them. They were very acute persons, those sons of Cephalus. Naturally so, I replied. Nevertheless, the traditions in the Pindar disobeying on our behest, although they acknowledge that the Cephalus was the son of Apollo, say also that he was bribed into healing a rich man who was at the point of death, and for this reason he was struck by lightning. But we, in accordance with the principle already affirmed by us, will not believe them when they tell us both. If he was the son of God, we maintain that he has no avaricious, or if he was avaricious, he was not the son of God. All that, Socrates, is excellent, but I should like to put the question to you. Are there not to be good physicians in the state, and who are not the best those who have treated the greatest number of constitutions, good and bad? Are they not the best judges in manner of those who are acquainted with all sorts of moral natures? Yes, I said. I too would have to like good judges and good physicians. But do you know whom I think is good? Will you tell me? I will if I can. Let me, however, note that in the same question you join two things which are not the same. How so? He asked. Why, I said, you join physicians and judges. Now, the most skillful physicians are those from their youth upwards, have combined the knowledge of their art, the greatest expertise with disease. They had better not be robust in health, and should have all the matters of diseases in their own person. For the body I conceive, not the instrument in which they cure the body, and that the case we could not allow them ever to be, or have to been sickly, but cure the body with the mind, and the mind which has become and is sick can cure nothing. That is very true, he said. But with the judges it is otherwise. Since he governs the mind by mind, he ought not therefore to have been trained among vicious minds, and to associate with them from youth onwards, and to have gone through the whole calendar of crime, only in order that he may be quickly to infer the crimes of others as he might be bodily diseases from his own self-consciousness. The honorable mind, which to form a healthy judgment, should have no experience or contamination of evil habits when young, and this reason why the youth good men often appear to be simple, and are easily practiced upon by dishonesty, because they have no examples of what evil is to their own souls. Yes, he said, they are far too apt to be deceived. Therefore, I said, the judge should not be young. He should be learned to know evil, and not from his own soul, but from late and long observations of nature and of evil in others. Knowledge should be his guide, not his personal experience. Yes, he said, that is the ideal of a judge. Yes, I replied, that he will be a good man, for which my answer to your question, for he is good who has a good soul. But the cunning and suspicious nature of which we spoke, he who has committed many crimes and fancies himself to be the master of wickedness, when he is among his followers, is wonderful in the precautions which he takes, but the judges of them by himself. But when he gets into the company of men of virtue, who have the experience of age, he appears to be a fool again, owing to his unseasonable suspicion. He cannot recognize an honest man because he has no pattern of honesty in himself. At the same time, the bad are more numerous than the good. He meets them with the oftener. He thinks himself, and by others thought to be, rather wise than foolish. Most true, he said. Then the good and wise judge whom we are seeking is not this man, but the other. For vice cannot know virtue too, but a virtuous nature, educated by time, will acquire knowledge both of virtue and vice. The virtuous and not the vicious man has wisdom, in my opinion, and in mine also. This is the sort of medicine, and this is the sort of law, which you see to sanction in your state. There will be ministered to better nature, giving health both to the soul and the body, But those who are diseased in their bodies will leave to die, and the corrupt and incurable souls they should be put an end to themselves. It's clearly the best thing for both the patients and for the state. And thus our youth, being educated only in the simple music which, as he said, inspires temperance, will be reluctant to go to law. Clearly. And the musician who keeps the same track is content to practice the simple gymnastics, and will have nothing to do with medicine unless in some extreme case. That I quite do believe. The very exercise and toils which he undergoes are intended to stimulate the spirited element of his nature, and not to increase his strength. He will not, like common athletes, use exercise and regiment to develop his muscles. Very right, he said. Neither are the two arts of music and gymnastics really designed, as is often supposed, the one for the training of the soul, and the other for training the body. What is the real object of them? I believe, I said, that the teachers both have very chiefly the improvement of the soul. How can that be, he asked. Did you never observe, I said, the effect on the mind itself in exclusive devotion to gymnastics, or the opposite effect of which exclusive devotion into music? In what way shown, he said. The one producing a temper of hardness and ferocity, the other of softness and refinement. But yes, he said, I am quite aware that the mere athlete becomes too much of a savage, and that the musician is melted and softened beyond what is good for him. Yet, surely, I said, this ferocity only comes from spirit, which, if rightly educated, would give courage, but if too much intensified, is liable to become hard and brutal, I quite think. On the other hand, the philosopher will have the quality of gentleness, and this also, when too much indulged, will turn to softness, but if educated rightly, will be gentle and moderate. True, and the opinions of guardians ought to have both these qualities. Assuredly, they both should be in harmony, beyond question. And the harmonious soul will be both temperate and courageous. Yes, and the inharmonious is cowardly and boorish. Very true. And when a man allows music to play upon him and to pour in his soul through the funeral of his ears, the funnel of his ears, those sweet and soft and melancholy ears of which we are now speaking, and his whole life is passed in wobbling in the sight of delight. In the first stage of the process, the passion of spirit in which him is tempered like iron and made useful instead of brittle and useless. But if he carries the softening and soothing process, in the next stage he begins to melt and waste, until he's wasted away his spirit and cut out the sinus of his soul. He becomes a feeble warrior. Very true. If the element of spirit is naturally weak to him, and the change is speedily accomplished, but if he has a good deal, then the power of music weakening the spirit renders him excitable, and at least on the least provocation he flames up at once, and is speedily extinguished. Instead of having spirit, he grows irritable and passionate, and is quite impractical. Exactly. And so in gymnastic, if a man takes violent exercise and is a great feeder, and the reverse of a good student in music and philosophy, at first the high condition of the body fills him with pride and spirit, and he becomes twice the man that he was. Certainly. And what happens? If he does nothing else, and holds no converse with the muses, does he not have the intelligence which may be in him, having no taste of any sort of learning or inquiry or thought or culture, grow feeble and dull and blind? His mind was never waking up or receiving nourishment, and his senses not being purged of their misery. True, he said. And he ended up becoming a hater of philosophy, uncivilized and never using the weapon of persuasion. He is like a wild beast in all violence and fierceness, and knows the other way of dealing, and lives in ignorance of evil conditions, and has no sense of property and grace. That's quite true, he said. And there are two principles of human nature, one the spirit and another philosophical. Some god, as I should say, has given mankind two arts answering to them, and only indirectly to the soul and the body, in order that these two principles, like strings out of an instrument, may be relaxed or drawn together until they are duly harmonized. That appears to be the intent. And when he mingles music with gymnastic in the fairest proportions, and best attempers them to the soul, might be rightfully called a true musician and harmonist, in a far higher sense than the tuner of the strings. You're quite right, Socrates. And such a presiding genius will always be required in our state if the government is to last. Yes, he will be absolutely necessary. Such, then, are our principles of nurture and education. Where would you be the use of going into further details about dances of our citizens, or their hunting or carousing, their gymnastics and equestrian contests? For them to follow the general principle, and having found that, we shall have no difficulty in discovering them. I dare to say that there will be no difficulty. Very good, I said. Then what about the next question? Must we not ask who is to be rulers and who is to subjects? Surely. There could be no doubt that the elder must rule the younger, clearly, and the best must rule. That is also clear. Now, are not the best husbandmen those who are the most devoted to husbandry? Yes. Are we not to have the best of guardians for our city? Must they not be those who the most character of the guardians? Yes. And to this end they ought to be wise and efficient, and to have a special care of the state. True. And a man who is most likely to care about the which he loves, to be sure, and he will be most likely to love which he regards as having the same interest with him, and that, of which the good and evil fortune is supposed by him at any time to be most affect his own. Very true, he replied. Then he must be a selection. Let us note among the guardians those whose whole life show the greatest eagerness to do what is good for their country, and the greatest repugnance to do what is against her interest. Those are the right men, and they will be watched at every age in order to see whether or not they preserve their resolution, and never, under the influence of either force or enchantment, forget or cast off their sense of duty to the state. How cast off, he said. I will explain to you, I replied. A resolution may go off the man's mind either that with his will or against his will, and with his will he will get rid of the falsehood and learn better, against his will whether he is deprived of truth. I understand, he said, the willing loss of resolution, the meaning of the unwilling I have yet to learn. Why, I said, do you not see the men are unwillingly deprived of good and willingly of evil? Is not to lost the truth of an evil, and then to possess the truth of a good? And would you agree that to conceive things as they are is to possess the truth? Yes, he replied, I agree with you that thinking that mankind is deprived of truth against their will, and one this involuntary deprivation caused either by theft or force or enchantment. Still, he replied, I do not understand you. I fear that I must have been talking darkly, like the tradition. I only meant that some men are changed by persuasion, and that others forget. Arguments steal away their hearts in one case, and then time in another, and then I call theft. You understand me? Yes. Those again who are forced to, whom the victims of violence or some pain or grief compels to change their opinion. I understand, he said. You are quite right. I would also acknowledge that the enchanted are those who change their mind under the softer influences of pleasure, or the stern influence of fear. Yes, he said, everything that deceives may be said to enchant. Therefore, as I was now saying, we must inquire who are the best guardians of their own conviction that what they think is the interest of the state be the rule of their lives. We must watch them from their youth onwards, and make them perform actions which they're likely to forget to be deceived. And we must remember and not be deceived is to be selected, and he who fails the trial is to be rejected. That will be the way. Yes, there shall also be toils and pains and conflicts prescribed for them, in which they will be made to give further proof of their same qualities. Very right, he replied. And then, I said, we must try with them with enchantments, and the third son of the test, and to see what will be their behaviors, like those who take the colts amid noise and tumult, to see if they are of the timid nature. So we must take our use amid terror of some kind, and again pass them into pleasure, to prove that more thoroughly than gold is proved but in the furnace, that we may discover whether they are armed against all enchantments, and the noble bearers always good guardians of themselves and the music which they have learned, and retaining all circumstances of rhythmical and harmonious nature, such as will be the most severical to the individual and to the state. And he who is at every age, as boy and youth is mature life, has come out of the trial victorious and pure, shall be appointed a ruler and guardian of the state. He shall be honored in life and death, and shall receive sculpture and other memorials of his honor, the greatest that we'll have to give. But he who fails we must reject. I am inclined to think that this sort of way in which our rulers and guardians should be chosen and appointed. I speak generally, not with any pretensions of exactness. And, speaking generally, I agree with you, he said. And perhaps the word guardius in the fullest sense ought to be applied to this higher class only when preserved against foreign enemies and maintain peace among our citizens at home, that one may not have the will, or others the power to harm us. The young men who will be called guardians may be more properly designed auxiliaries and supporters of the principles of the ruler. I agree with you, he said. Now then we may devise one of the needful falsehoods which we lately spoke, just one royal lie which may deceive the rulers if that be possible, and at any rate the rest of the city. What sort of lie? He said. Nothing new, I replied. Only an old Phoenician tale of what has often occurred before now and in other places. As the poets say, we have made the world believe, though not in our time, and I do not know whether an event could ever happen again, or now even be made probable if it did. How your words seem to hesitate on your lips. You will not wonder, I replied, at my hesitation what you have heard. Speak, he said, and fear not. Well then, I will speak, although I really know not how to look you in the face, or what words to utter in the audacious fiction, which I propose to communicate gradually, first to the rulers, then to the soldiers, then lastly to the people. They are to be told that the youth was a dream, and then the education and training that you received from us, in appearance only, in reality during that time was being formed and fed to the womb of the earth, and they themselves in their arms and of pureness were manufactured. When they were completed, the earth their mother set them up, and so their country being the mother and also the nurse, they are bound to advise for her good and to defend her against attacks, and are citizens that are to be regarded as children of earth and their own brother. You had good reason, he said, to be ashamed of the lie which you were going to tell. True, I realize, but that's more coming. I have only told you half. Citizens, we shall say to them in our tale, you are brothers, yet God has framed you differently. Some of you have the power to command, and the composition of these had a mingled gold, wherefore also the greatest honor. Others which are made of silver, and to be auxiliaries. Others against who are to be husbandmen and craftsmen, and have composed of brass and iron, and the species will generally be preserved in children. But we are all the same original stock. A golden parent will sometimes have a silver son, or a silver parent, a golden son. And God proclaims as the first principle to the rulers, and above else, that there is nothing which they should so anxiously guard, or to which there be such good guardians, as the purity of the race. They should observe what elements mingle in their offspring. For if a son of a golden or silver parent has an admixture of brass and iron, then nature orders a transposition of ranks, and the eyes of the ruler must not be pitiful towards a child because he has descended in the scale, and because the huntsmen are artisans, just as the sons of artisans who having an admixture of gold and silver are them a race to honor, and become guardians or auxiliaries. For an oracle to say that a man of brass or iron to the state, it will be destroyed. Such is tale. Is there a possibility of making our citizens believe in it? Not in the present generation, he replied. There's no way of accomplishing it. But their sons may be believed in the tale, and their son's son, and posterity after them. I see the difficulty, I replied, yet fostering of such a belief will make them care more for a city and one another. Enough, however, of the fiction, which may now be fly abroad in the wings of rumor, while arms on our earth-born heroes, and lead them forth under the command of their ruler. Let us look round and select us out where they can best suppress insurrection. If they any prove refractory within, and defend themselves against enemies, who like wolves may come down on the fold or without letting them encamp. And when they encamp, let them sacrifice the proper gods and prepare their dwelling. Just so, he said. And the dwellings must be such that will shield them from against the colds of winter and the heat of summer. I suppose you could mean houses, he replied. Yes, I said, but they must be houses of soldiers, not of shopkeepers. What is the difference, he said. That will be the endeavor to explain, I replied. To keep watchdogs from whom the disciple or hungry or some evil habit or another would turn upon the sheep and worry about them, and behave not like dogs but wolves, would be foul and monstrous thing in a shepherd. Truly monstrous, he said. Therefore, every care must be taken of our auxiliaries. Being stronger than our citizens, it may not grow to be too much for them, and become savage tyrants instead of friends or allies. Yes, great care should be taken. And would it not be really good education to furnish the best safeguards? But they are well educated already, he replied. I cannot be so confident, my dear Glasson, I said. I am much more certain that they ought to be, and their true education, whatever that may be, will have the greatest tendency to civilize and humanize them in their relations to one another, and those who were under their protection. Very true. And not only their education, but their habitation, and also what will belong to them, should be such as neither impair their virtue as guardians, nor tempt them to prey upon other citizens, as a man of sense must acknowledge that. He must. Then let us consider what will be the best way of life, through to realize our idea from them. In the first place, none of them should have any property of his own beyond what is absolutely necessary. Neither should they have a private house or store closed against anyone who will have a mind to enter. Their provisions should only be such as required by trained warriors, who are men of temperance and courage. They should be agreed to receive from the citizens a fixed rate of pay, enough to meet the expenses of a year and no more, and they should go to a mess and live together with soldiers in a camp. Gold and silver will tend to them when they have from God. The diviner metal is within them. They have therefore no need of the drosses which are current among men, and ought not to pollute the divine by such earthly admixture. From the commoner metal has the sense of many unholy deeds, but their own is undefiled, and they alone of all citizens may not touch or handle silver or gold, but under the same roof with them, or wear them, or drink from them. And they will have their own salvation, and they will be the saviors of the state. But they should ever acquire homes or lands or money of their own. They shall become housekeepers or husbandmen instead of guardians, enemies and tyrants instead of allies of other citizens. Hating and being hated, plotting and being plotted against, they will pass their whole lives in much greater terror of internal than of external enemies. And the hour of reign, both to themselves and to the state, will be at hand. For all the reasons we may not say that such our state shall be ordered, and that these shall be the regulation appointed by us for our guardians concerning their houses and other matters. Yes, said Glasson.